we have to ask ourselves, is design and innovation the same thing, right? It could at times be, but often they're very different, right? I like to think of design as a gift, right? As like something that if you do it well and someone uses it, you've given them a gift, right? And so that's a nice way to think about how protective someone may or may not want to be about their idea.
We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives, but where did it all come from? Who designed it? How was it built and brought to market? And what will it look like in a year, 2 years, 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Majenta Strongheart, and this is The Bomb, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design. Today on the podcast, we're joined by product designer, interior architect, and art director Cory Grosser. We'll talk about some of the exciting things that are coming soon to the Bomb podcast and the process of creating the DesignLab Space. Plus, how Cory got into design in the first place and then moved from furniture to interiors to architecture. Then we'll discuss how to create a space that invokes a specific feeling, how to design a workspace that fuels productivity, some of the pros and cons of virtual spaces, and what the future holds. If you're interested in how design and aesthetics impact human behavior, I know you're going to love my conversation with Cory Grosser. And stick around after for my debrief with Gio and Bruce about my conversation with Cory and some new DesignLab updates. Welcome to The Bomb, Cory. I'm so excited to have you as our guest today and start to tease out to the crowd that you will be joining us as a co-host for a new monthly segment of The Bomb.
Yeah, we're really excited to be here, Majenta. Thank you so much. I'm super psyched.
Yeah, I was thinking about how long, we've been working together now. It's got to be, I've been here about 5 years, and you guys opened up the lab maybe a year before that. And so you probably started designing it how long before that?
About a year and a half, I would say.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so I think we should give a little background information. You're not only the designer of DesignLab, but also of Supplyframe's headquarters. And you're not only an amazing designer of interiors and furniture and spaces, but also a professor at Art Center just down the street.
I am, yeah. I've been working in Pasadena for the past, 15 years or so. I started out in Los Angeles in 1999. So I love Pasadena, and it's, the Design Lab is very close to my office. So I get to pop in here often and visit you, and I'm glad to be so close.
Yeah. And what was it like designing the space? I think it was kind of unique to what you were doing at the time as a firm, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because at that time when we started thinking about this, a lot of creative space, they were trying to warm it up and make it more home-like and more friendly. So the idea, which I guess is kind of has re-entered vogue because of COVID, is trying to make your workplace feel more like home. And we wanted to kind of do the exact opposite of that and try to make it feel less like home and more like a secret kind of club or a secret lair. So that's one reason why it's really dark in here. We painted we covered the ceiling in black, to keep kind of the light down. I was doing a lot of projects for Disney, spaces for Disney at the time. And of course, for Disney, it's more about optimism, and it's definitely about being approachable, where this was actually supposed to be a little bit more the feeling of that you were in kind of a secret club.
Yeah. And I will say that I feel like as someone who works here regularly, that we do feel pretty cool and exclusive being in this space, it's something that obviously we have a ton of community events, but the space is what really impacts people when they enter. Even when we have, our executive meetings and it's folks' first time, maybe we interacted online before, had a virtual meeting, but they walk in this space and it's just a whole new understanding of what we do, what we're about, that we take design seriously. And so I think you accomplished so much in that regard as far as, how you designed it.
Well, thanks for the compliments. I'm glad it's not terrible every day.
No.
I would feel really
you
bad.
made this dark box for us.
Right.
No.
It's a historic building too, which I think is kind of cool. So Pasadena has a lot of these boat truss kind of boat truss structures. So there was a lot to work with. It was kind of a blank shell when we got here.
It was a car dealership before, right?
Yeah, it was when I was a student, it was a Maserati dealership. And I remember I used to pass by and kind of, dream of those cars. So yeah, I totally remember that. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so maybe you can give us a little bit more of the Cory Grosser origin story, how you got into furniture design and spaces. Have you always done both and more, or were you more purely furniture at one point, more purely interior at any point? And when did you know that this is what you wanted to do?
It's all I wanted to do. So I think I used to play with blocks when I was a kid, and I think someone said, "Oh, you should be an architect." And it just kind of stuck. I'm like, okay, I'll be an architect. So I never really thought about anything else except I like to play football. So I was like, well, maybe I could be a professional football player, but I'm not big enough nor fast enough. So, it was back to being a designer. So it was kind of, I don't think that there's anything else I really ever considered. And, when I was going to architecture school, I had the sense, my 18, 19-year-old brain had the sense that you have to be mature to design a building, and I was kind of, what's the word, I guess, impatient. And so I got into industrial design or product designs because I thought it was something that I could design when I was young, when I was first getting going. So then that's when I moved here to Pasadena, went to Art Center, and studied products, mostly kind of because I had an architecture training. I was really it was a natural fit to do products that were related to spaces, so furniture, lights, and whatnot. Although I was interested in designing all different types of products. So that's the way that my career started. And I was doing product design for Disney, and they asked if I could do a little space for them, a creative space. And I said yes, because I figured, hey, I went to architecture school. I can probably figure this out. And so that's what basically started the designing space. So I think it's really common for architects or interior designers to grow into designing products, but I actually started in the opposite direction.
Yeah, totally. I totally get what you're saying about when you first started in architecture, feeling like, oh, you're not going to be able to maybe get to do the projects you want to do until later in your career or that kind of thing. Like I took a couple architecture classes in high school and thought I might do that. And then was like, I want to be able to design, if I'm going to do architecture, I want to be able to do what Frank Gehry's doing. And it felt like that's going to be so far away. Like, will I ever even get there? Or will I be designing cubicles for half of my career,
Totally. Yeah.
And so I totally, get where you're coming from there. And so what are some of your favorite projects that you've worked on?
Oh, it's a tough one. I think
because you've had some pretty crazy collaborations and companies that you've gotten to work with.
Yeah.
And then you've gotten to do all your awesome furniture on your own too.
For being a small studio, we've worked with really good brands, which is really cool. It's just kind of gone that way from the beginning. And we almost exclusively work with brands. So, but if I had, picking favorite projects is kind of like
favorite kids.
It's like, some are good for some reasons and others are good for others. But it was cool working with Disney. Like we did a chair for them in 2009. And I got to spend time in the archives and see original blueprints for Cinderella's castle and things like that. So sometimes having access to things or ending up in situations that you wouldn't expect, I think are really cool. And then other things, I guess I just personally think fit my style better, or things that I really like, certain chairs that we've done that I was like, they might not be our best sellers, but I have a special affinity for some of those.
Absolutely. And how would you describe your design philosophy or design aesthetic?
Yeah, we spend a lot of time talking about that. I think, I would call it happy minimalism, or kind of this idea of California minimalism. So it's always trying to kind of reduce things and simplify them. As my fiance would say, like, I'm a pretty messy person, really. And so design for me is a way to kind of aspire to be less messy. And I like design that's clean. I like to design in a clean way and try to create spaces that are, kind of structured and rational and ordered. But it's not austere. So it's not cold. And that's kind of maybe the happy part of happy minimalism, or the California part, because it is kind of this trying to have a spirit that's more optimistic, I suppose. So optimistic minimalism.
I like that. I really appreciated what you were saying before we started recording about empathetic design. And that's something that it sounds like you think a lot about within your studio, but also something you talk about with your students. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about how that comes into play with your work.
Yeah. So I think if we say happy minimalism, right, that's like an aesthetic sensibility and a philosophy. But this idea of empathy in design, I think, is really critical. And it's maybe where design has evolved too. I think it's, if you think about spaces in particular, the way you feel inside a space is just as important as the way the space functions. So, or like, why do you buy things that you buy? So I started out working early in my career. I worked for quite a few car companies. And, one thing I learned through that experience is people buy a car not only for functional reasons, but also for emotional reasons, right? So I learned very early on that you have to understand the emotional part of design, because that influences, one, how people feel in a space or behave in a space. But when we talk about products, it also influences their purchasing decisions, right? And the cars are a perfect example.
Yeah, cars are a really interesting example of kind of a lot of like human psychology, I feel like, or the decisions people make or how they decide what kind of car they want. I remember going to a lecture actually at Art Center where they were talking about how oftentimes people purchase cars for what they might need it for rather than like what they actually use cars, day to day for. And like, you think about someday you might need the truck to cart some things, or one day you're going to have a family, so you're going to need more seats, or that once a month you might do a trip with a bunch of friends, so you get the car for that.
Yep.
Which I think is just an interesting, thing that comes up also when you design things is what are all the use cases, or what are people going to be thinking or feeling when they are going to pick this versus the other option, right?
I teach this kind of this idea of what we call the psychology of form. And it kind of means that aesthetics have different emotional characters or emotional kind of output. Taking my kids to school this morning, they were talking about how different cars have different kind of smiles, right? And my younger daughter said, "Hey, this one looks angry and this one looks sweet." And I was really like, I was very proud, because I think that it's really a nice way to think about our built environment, that they do kind of signal these larger kind of emotional issues. And it's apparent with cars, but it happens in a lot of different things. Everything that we kind of, touch. And we know color, of course, that's been studied for a long time about how color influences our emotional state. But we think less about how form and how shapes influence our emotional state, but they do.
Mm-hmm. And faces are such a universal like language almost, like it's one of the earliest things we've drawn as species, and something that we still across languages use to communicate and express. And I think that it's really, common for people and especially creatives, because I find my friends and I doing this all the time, like, snapping pictures of faces in the environment everywhere you go, right? Different objects that come together to make a face in that space. So I love that your kids are doing that.
Babies, we're born with like a certain ability to decode aesthetics, right? So people will say beauty is subjective, and beauty is somewhat subjective, but there's also, we also respond to scale, proportion, and shapes and colors in a way that's natural, that we're born with.
Mm-hmm.
So, and smile is a big part of that. When you're a baby and mom or dad smiles, you know, the baby responds. And in a way that's like that's a direct correlation between what you see, your visual kind of, you know, your visual input, and the way that you feel. It's pretty cool.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm going to shift. I feel like we could go on and on about this, but I'm going to shift the conversation a little bit back to, so our focus on the bomb is all about kind of the intersection of design and technology. And I'm really excited to hear your perspective on this and some of the guests you're going to bring to the show. Because I think that a lot of times with the work we're doing at DesignLab, we come from more the engineer perspective, the inventor perspective, which we were talking also about before this. But from the designer perspective, what do you think is the role of technology? And I think there's a lot of ways we could go about this, you know, the process of prototyping and the tools you use in the creative process versus technology in the final product or in the brands that you work with. But I'd love to hear your...
Yeah, there's also a third way in that technology, especially for products, technology is important in the way things are manufactured. So I think as designers, you know, we get to use technologies, maybe like, for example, 3D printing, like it's cool. And I think most people at this point know about 3D printing, but I was 3D printing over 20 years ago. So as a tool in design, you know, and the machines, of course, were very expensive.
I was going to say, where the machines took up a whole room.
Yeah. And, you know, it felt like, wow, like this is really forward. And so sometimes technology that's used in behind the scenes eventually becomes more of a consumer technology. And I think that that's pretty interesting. In some ways, I think I'm really into technology and design for personal reasons because it allows us to reduce. So if we go back to this idea about minimalism, you know, if you think about your phone and all of the things your phone can do, you know, it replaces 4, 5, 6 different devices. So just by, as technology kind of advances, you know, there is kind of a natural evolution of reduction. You know, if we look at Apple as a classic example, they're constantly trying to make things thinner, right? And again, that's a minimalist kind of approach, but in the end, if you think about it, it's also good for the environment. It's good for the less resources we can use. So I think technology allows us to do that. When I went to look for a TV for my new house, I wanted the thinnest possible TV that I could get, you know, and I probably paid more for the same kind of specs and the same features, but it's very, very, very close to the wall, you know, and I kind of love that idea. And I think that at some point, the wall and your TV will become one, right? So it'll reduce to the point where it's almost dissolved. So I think that's pretty exciting.
You were talking about the TV for your home. We just did an interview with you at your new space that you designed, your new house, right? Where we were talking a lot about the kind of all the new tech that you've integrated into your design. And I love that you brought up that example again of like the TV eventually becoming part of the wall. I think some of the other things you mentioned were like heating elements maybe being able to be incorporated into different fabrics and surfaces.
Yeah, I don't have them, but you know, there's speakers out there that you build into your wall and then you drywall over. So so you don't see them at all. And they have a certain way of kind of causing, you know, vibrations in the wall or directly behind the wall. So they're there, you just don't see them because they're plastered behind your painted wall.
Can a space ever be too minimalist?
I would say yes, if you don't feel good in there, you know? So
if it doesn't feel
for
homey.
me, like the type of work that we do is minimalist, but let's say you're a maximalist and you want like a lot of bling in your space, you know, no judgment here. I think if that makes you feel good or if it's a brand and that's your brand values, right? I think, you probably shouldn't hire us to do it, but no problem. Like I definitely I'm not about, judging what's good design or bad design. Outside of the fact is like, does it feed your well-being? Do you feel good about it? Does it accomplish what it's supposed to accomplish? So, yes, I think a space could be too minimal. Sure.
So thinking about technology and spaces, something that we were just talking about on our last DesignLab debrief on the bomb was kind of virtual spaces and how it's becoming more and more. I mean, at this point, I think it's becoming almost like a buzzword at this point. It's definitely trendy, or like virtual spaces that are being tokenized and all these different kinds of things, right? But how do you feel about the design of virtual spaces? Is this like an exciting area for you and the kind of the future, or even the current, where design's at? And is it something that, you and your students talk about that's coming up in Art Center's curriculum?
I personally thought about it quite a bit. I'm not sure if the students, I bet you they are, Yeah. I think kind of the, NFTs and whatnot is very big with design students right now. It's very interesting. But as someone that designs basically commercial or public spaces, mostly, I want people to go to those spaces physically, right? Like it's, and I like connecting with people, and I want people to like connecting people. So, there's this buzzword that we're using around the office, or not buzzword, but this phrase. It's like, okay, like if people would rather stay home to work, then we have to make their workplace so good and so exciting that they want to make the commute. Mm-hmm. Right. And if we don't do that, we're not doing our job. And I think that's what companies and brands are going to have to do. Like they're going to have to make their spaces so engaging. For example, this space, you just can't have all this stuff at home. Yeah. Right. So it's not possible. You don't have the tools. You don't have even the atmosphere. Right. Mm-hmm. So you might desire to come here, even if you have to go through the commute, right?
Definitely. I was going to say Supplyframe's headquarters. I know a lot of people were waiting for us to be allowed to come back in person because they missed the office atmosphere and they missed like how that space made them feel, how they could focus. It helped with their productivity. They felt like they could collaborate easier in that space. So I think that also, again, really speaks to the design. People would rather be there than working from home.
If we go back to this idea of culture or well-being or kind of empathy, right? I think I'm really focused on trying to make people want to be in the space. Yeah, totally.
In real life.
That said, like there's a fear here that if you can do your job completely remotely, like what's to keep why not just move your job someplace else? Mm-hmm. Like, right? So, staying connected to your workplace, or the people that you work with is critically important. I think if everyone's going to be working at home, and I think digital spaces or virtual spaces are a way to do that. So I think if we can't have people in person, let's say, for whatever reason, creating digital places where they can come and have these connections and kind of have these ideas, these empathic ideas about feeling part of a larger kind of organization, I think it's totally possible. So I'm for physical spaces, but I definitely see the potential in virtual spaces, and I think it's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's an interesting challenge. Like on the one hand, I think with a lot of the tools we use in prototyping and product development already, you have a lot of opportunity with 3D models because they're part of the process to get from, design to manufacture. And then this is almost, I think, like an area to be curious and really explore what can you now do with those 3D models, what's possible in a virtual space that's not possible in a physical space, right? That you can take, translate what you've created in the physical world. And again, make it still feel true to your brand and true to what you've been able to provide people in those spaces.
Yeah, I think there's also like a generational component that's maybe important. My kids grew up inside Roblox, and it's like they grew up creating worlds and then also socializing within those worlds, right? And I clearly didn't. I'm the video game generation, I suppose. so there was a virtual component, but we weren't living inside of it, and for us, socialization was getting together with our friends to play video games. So we're around the technology, but physically together, where their socialization is apart. And so I think it's important to note that as the workforce changes, the expectations of the workplace will change also. And maybe the virtual has a place in that.
I fully feel this I have 2 younger brothers, and, one of them grew up always in oh my gosh, I'm going to blank, not Minecraft. One of them does Minecraft now. But anyways, in those spaces, I was super into Sims growing up. And it's funny because it's very telling now, but like, I just wanted to make the houses and the furniture and decorate them. And then I didn't care what the people were doing, but I wasn't spending a lot of time in there socializing. So again, maybe that's why I'm like, oh, it could be interesting to create these virtual, spaces again, because we were doing that. But I definitely have a fear around like everyone just socializing through, virtual spaces.
Yeah.
That's like not the world I want to live in.
No,
so
I think
I get defensive,
totally.
Worried about it, but I'm trying to be more like optimistic and be like, there's potential here. It doesn't have to go the dark route.
I think anyone that's ever been in a long distance dating relationship knows how hard it is, right? And so I think that we will always be better face to face in some ways. It'll always have advantages, right? But I remember before the pandemic, we had Zoom at the office, and we used it, but it wouldn't work, or we wouldn't set it up right, or it was always like a drama to get it going. And now it's like second nature to us, right? Because of the pandemic. And so there's an example of the world actually getting smaller, that I can now have more efficient meetings in Spain or Italy or Sweden or whatever than I would have had before the pandemic. But of course, when I see those people in person, it feels
it's
better
totally
somehow,
different.
right?
Yeah, it's so much better. Absolutely. And I can say the same for our work here at DesignLab. Like, we obviously tried to do our best to maintain hybrid kind of outreach throughout the past couple years, and make as many of our in-person engagements, kind of translate to digital experiences. But there's nothing like having the community members come back in person and being able to engage in person and be able to travel again and meet people at their spaces and see what that's like after years of talking to them and seeing it in the background.
Sure.
So yeah, I think there's a time and a place for it all.
Totally.
And I think, like you were saying, even though we have these tools, like I feel the same. We talk about this like with the pencil, for example. Like, we have all these ways to draw online or to like take notes on your phone or whatever, but I still, take a pencil and a notepad into the wood shop when I'm working on something, because it just is going to work better for my process.
Yeah.
And even after all these years, we haven't totally gotten rid of the pencil, and it's, this old technology. So I think that, there will be these things that outlast even the latest innovations,
I think so
right?
too.
So I don't have a great segue for this. I'm trying to think of how to do it, but
you're doing very well. I mean, from
thanks.
one question to the next, I'm very impressed.
Thanks. Oh, I just messed it up, but appreciate it. Okay, so speaking about your work at Art Center, so you went to school there, now you're teaching there. And how do you feel we were talking about this actually with Gio before this, with industrial design, is this name still appropriate? And how do you feel the design education space, or even just how designers are being, kind of brought up, has evolved over time since your time in school and now being kind of on the other side of things? Yeah,
it's interesting. It's kind of funny because every generation of Art Center grads thinks that the youngest generation has it easier. So they'll say, back in my day, this like school was so much tougher, right? But
oldest sibling.
I don't really buy into that. I think what students are asked to understand and learn, they're asked to learn so much more. So with all of these new technologies and the changing, or even this idea of empathy, right? Like now my students have to learn about empathy and what that means for design. So the things that they the breadth of things that they have to kind of encompass in their education is probably more broad. Maybe they can't go as deep into the individual things as we could before, but I think design education is always completely evolving, and I think it's much different than when I went to school, 20 some odd years ago.
Have you noticed any things change over the last few years, even as far as the students' interests or focuses on what they want to be designing, or kind of who they want to be designing for, what industries they want to enter?
I've been teaching at Art Center for quite a long time. I think 17 or 18 years. And every few years, kind of the trends and the things that students are interested in, they change, they come and go, And for me, being able to look at it kind of from a overview over the years, it's really interesting to see things come out, come in and out of fashion. For example, a few years ago, all my students started bringing in like these designs, these like really strong brutalist designs, and I'm like, where is this coming from, right? And it's probably Pinterest or whatever.
Yeah.
This collective conscious.
Right.
But I think it's really fascinating, these trends, how things come and go, and also it's not only about trends or styles or materials. It's also about the way that students interact, whether they're more social or when I went to Art Center, we were very, very, very competitive with each other. And I think my students now tend to be a little bit more, they would be more inclined to work together. They're more collaborative, and so I think that's really interesting. But yeah, it just, things kind of ebb and flow and go in and out.
Definitely.
It's cool. It's
and
cool
interesting
to
probably to see what comes back. Like you're saying, these brutalist designs, like that's, bringing back from years and years before, right? Like what are they inspired by? What, is coming back in fashion, even from prior decades, right?
Yeah. It's a little bit like when you grew up in the 80s and you're at a bar someplace and there's all these 80s, songs and everyone is singing along.
Everyone's wearing 80s
and they're very,
t-shirts now.
they clearly weren't alive in the 80s, right? So I think there is a little bit of that design, sometimes trends in design can be cyclical and kind of go in and out. And the older you get, the more times you get to see those cycles kind of come in and out. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. On the topic of kind of competition, something we think about a lot, in the audiences we work with, not only students, but even with the Hackaday Prize, we're working with university students. We're talking to a lot of design and engineering students about open source. And, obviously that's a big part of what we promote through our initiatives. And it's something that we've talked about, Gio and I, as designers, having design education that was very, it's kind of embedded in design oftentimes. I would be interested to hear what you think about this, but I feel like it tends to be like, I'm the designer. There's a lot attached to like, I own this design or this is mine. And like that you don't, you want to like hide your process and not, protect it so it doesn't get ripped off or something like this. But it seems like, especially in this kind of day and age of social media and needing to really build out your brand and exposure, that sharing is really like you get more out of that oftentimes. And is this something that comes up even, we've talked about like patent law and how it's so kind of dated when it comes to technology and advancing technology for, we're talking to startup entrepreneurs and founders, and they're not going to be able to keep up with the expenses of patenting oftentimes, right? And it's worth it for them to just stay lean and stay ahead with making sure the technology and their brand behind it really is what people come to them for, right? So how do you feel when it comes to your own work and also what you're kind of teaching your students about kind of locking things up versus sharing, or what are the values or pros and cons of these different sides of things?
We have to ask ourselves, is design and innovation the same thing, right? And it could at times be like design and innovation can be the same, but often they're very different, right? And let me give an example. When you go out to a great restaurant, right? Or you want to like try this amazing new chef. The chef is using food, the same ingredients, right? But they're put together in a different way, that's a very different conversation than a chef that's creating new food, right? So, and maybe people won't always enjoy created food, right? It's not always appealing, right? And so if sometimes, like for me personally, I like to think of myself in parallel to a chef is that, okay, well, if I'm designing a chair, we know what a chair is. There's actually, we might have some mechanism that's an innovation, but in general, the chair functions so you can sit, right? There's no true innovation outside of a mechanism or maybe a manufacturing innovation. So what a chair becomes, the design of a chair becomes, is it becomes about putting ingredients together in a way that's different and pleasing and maybe feels fresh. So in that sense, you know, I think that design and innovation aren't exactly the same. Now, if we're talking about innovations, of course, it's important to kind of protect your ideas. But I think in the design world, design is not always an innovation, right? And I think it's an important distinction to make. And I think for young designers, if we speak about my students graduating, I think I would suggest that they're not afraid of their idea being taken. If you're a painter and you're getting your career going, you're not worried about your painting getting copied, right? You're creating to create, and then you're hoping people enjoy it. And I would say for a young designer, approach your work the same way. Like, think about it as, I like to think of design as a gift, right? As like something that if you do it well and someone uses it, you've given them a gift, right? And so that's a nice way to think about how protective someone may or may not want to be about their idea.
Yeah, get it out there and let it kind of, I think, spread the joy or what it brings. And it is tough with social media and all kind of these platforms that design can get. In a professional context, it's sometimes difficult because, you know, these ideas, if we're working on a chair for a company or another type of product for a company, we actually do have to protect that idea, right? So that is a secret, and it has to be until the chair is released. And sometimes a similar thing will pop up on social media, you know, and it may not be real, but then there's an interesting dialogue about what to do now. So it is a little bit, I think being a young designer and being a designer developing ideas or designs for, you know, for the world, it's a slightly different context. A little different, than more established or mid-career. Absolutely. So what can people expect? What can our listeners expect from our new segment together? Yeah. So I think my own work and my own belief is this idea that design is really about culture, but it's also about commerce. It's about beauty and about business. So my part of the podcast will be about the intersection between beauty, aesthetics, form, design from a visual standpoint or a tactile standpoint or an emotional standpoint, and what that means for brands and what that means for commerce and what that means for business. And so sometimes, you know, I have to put my artist hat on, and sometimes I have to put my business person's hat on. And I think the part of the podcast that I like to kind of explore and the guests that I like to be to kind of for us to engage with are people that live in that kind of in between zone. And I think it's really interesting, and that's what I hope to bring. Yeah, I think that's going to be awesome and super relevant to so many of our listeners, because oftentimes we are working with founders, entrepreneurs, people that are in these intersections of business, design, engineering. They're trying to make, you know, their work profitable, of course. So I think that's going to be really exciting to just add that next layer to some of the insights we're providing to the industry and the intersection of design and technology. Yeah, and I'm so glad to be doing this with you. I mean, you're a very, very talented host. Oh, well, thank you. And so last but not least, this is the question we ask at the end of all of our episodes. We are the bomb. So what would you say is on your personal bill of materials? And you can interpret this however way you like.
I think that in the end, I feel blessed to have found this job. I've traveled all over the world. I've seen crazy things. I've been to crazy places because of design. And I think that on a Sunday night, I never dread Mondays. And I think that that's a real blessing. And so for me, just still being passionate about being able to live a life of a creative person and being able to kind of make a job and a profession out of being creative, I think is a blessing. And I think that's what keeps me going. And I hope that never goes away.
That's so cool and honestly inspiring because, that's what I think a lot of creatives really hope to find. And that's a unique answer that we haven't heard yet on the bomb. Oftentimes people are talking about exercise or like what, they need coffee to get up in the morning, but you're saying the work itself.
I should probably design less and exercise more, I think. I know people in my life that would be very happy with that.
No, but that the work itself is what keeps you going, I think is what a lot of people really aspire to, is that not dreading Monday morning is a big deal. That's awesome.
My mom, my mom owned a ballet studio, and I think she had this, like she was passionate to go to work and to do her job, which she loved, and I think perhaps, some of that comes from her and I'm lucky in that way. And that's what I hope for my kids too. I don't know what they will be or what they will become, but I just hope that they get to go to work on Monday and love it, as much as I do.
Yeah, I love that you brought them by DesignLab and Supplyframe a few times. I've seen you showing them around, and I think that's awesome for them to be able to see the process. I'm sure it's going to come back in ways you can't even imagine in the future.
They'll critique me too.
That's good. They're not afraid to keep it real.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Cory, for your time today. Really excited for this new perspective on the bomb, and we'll just tell our listeners to keep an eye out for more to come.
Oh, can't wait, Majenta. Thank you so much.
We're back with my colleagues Gio and Bruce for another DesignLab debrief. It's always fun to have Cory stop by the space. Sometimes we'll see him pop in for tours with his students or with other clients. So it was nice to have some more quality time this time to catch up and learn more about his background and entry into design and all that he does now at his firm.
I love his design style. I'm a big fan.
I was fortunate enough to actually get to know Cory as an instructor while I was working at Art Center. And you can tell that his students really respect him. I guess great feedback, good designer, great instructor. So really, interacting with him here is also amazing. It's great to have like that connection still. So
yeah. And it's pretty amazing just how this space really, you can tell, impacts people when they walk in the door, like without fail. And so we've had several meetings with people where, it was in the background. We were describing, what DesignLab does, blah, blah, blah. But then they come in person and it's like, wow, I had no idea. It was so beautiful. Or, what a cool space you work in. There's always, really positive responses when people walk in the door.
Yes, it is a space that quickly yells at you its identity. When you come into the lobby, it's all white, and then you come to the main area, and the black and yellow is just powerful. First time I was here, I was really interested, like really in shock of how much these colors make contrast, but it's easy to work here. Mm-hmm. It's not like you feel how would you say that? Like, not obliterated, but what's the word? Overwhelmed by the colors?
Yeah, it's not too intense.
It's not too intense.
And that's, I think, really due to the kind of juxtaposition of the older building and all of the installation, design that Cory's done.
Right, incorporating
that balance of warmth as well.
Right, great point. Taking the old style of the brick of the original building and incorporating an ultra modern element to it. It looks great. People love it. They're blown away when, like you guys are saying, when they walk in. Well, what a cool space, because you get to see the history and new interesting elements to environmental design.
Yeah.
Whereas you can walk into buildings and see like, wow, this is made in the 60s. This is made in the 70s. This was made in the 80s. And it didn't age well.
Yeah.
And
definitely.
so I think, 30 years from now, we're going to be like, hey, what an amazing space. And not have any regrets about like, oh, that was.
Yeah, it's pretty
Corey's
timeless
pretty good.
feeling.
That's the word I was looking for, is timeless.
And I loved how Cory was able to boil down his aesthetic. He was saying to happy minimalism is sort of how they describe their brand and whatnot. And I was trying to think, wow, what would I describe my own aesthetic as if I had to?
One-liner.
For like my interior design tastes.
Boil it down.
I don't design my interior space. I just grab any piece of furniture that I find.
But you're a product designer. That's
I know.
not true. You love IKEA.
Okay.
Everyone loves IKEA. Most people love IKEA.
Well, we graduated from IKEA to living spaces. Let me tell you that.
Okay. Big announcement.
Yes,
Newsflash.
announcement. But yes, it's mostly my wife who picks the furniture.
Okay, so yeah.
Yes.
Okay, if
That's-
you
so
were
is
picking
that-
the
that
furniture,
the,
then what would be your...
In terms of design,
You can't avoid the question. Even your own
you know,
products.
I love the definition that he gave. Happy minimalism tells you so much. It's hard to
can't
beat
take
that
it.
one. So I cannot take that one. Nor I think my style is that. I would say is something like rational geometry, but I'm trying to move from the rational part. You know, I'm trying to make things a little bit less intentional, a little bit thinking less in the manufacturing processes. So
Okay.
I'm trying to move away from the rational, but maybe keeping the geometry part of it.
Nice.
Like, there's that term, right? The bowl in a china shop. And I always kind of think of like what tier of what I'm making or designing or occupying will survive the bowl. What
Okay.
What will the
You
aftermath?
design things to be like super robust.
If I can help
Invincible.
it, or if it's known this isn't gonna hold up for very long, so be gentle with it. So if you know what tier the stage of destruction the item will, or environment will be in after the worst of situations, then that's kind of how I perceive a lot of, I guess, my outlook on life.
All right.
Yeah, so not everything's going to be built to last,
Exactly.
but unless you can help it,
Sometimes planned obsolescence can be a good thing if that helps things to, assimilate into the environment better.
I like that. Right.
When you're saying that, do you mean almost like... That almost sounds like different than the traditional definition of planned obsolescence. Like, are you saying design things that can like decompose in their environments almost?
Yes. So if you design, let's think of a gear that is super sturdy and it will outlive everyone, that may not be what you want. You want something according to
Tinker toy.
a spec,
Yeah.
but that after its expected life, 10, 20 years, it can start to disintegrate or break down more easily.
Yeah, I like that perspective. Yeah, I think mine would be... What I came up with most immediately was like playful simplicity, but I can always think of examples that are outside of that, so maybe I won't. I don't know if that's true.
Playful. Almost sounds like happy.
No, but it's different. You're right. Is that too close? They're just synonyms for happy minimalism. No, I think
Similar.
it's different. I think I like to play with a lot of different colors, different forms and things, or in my own home when it comes to not things that I'm designing, but spaces I'm putting together, like having lots of colorful art on the walls, different patterns, but all around it's not, I still wouldn't say it goes maximalist. Like, it is still kind of simple and functional. It's still the goal.
Do you have a favorite designer?
I do. I have a couple. I am a big fan of Chen Chen and Kai Williams' design group based out of New York. I also really like Forma Fantasma And then my design idol.
Hashtag goals.
Yeah, exactly. Is India Madhavi, I believe is how you pronounce her name. But yeah, love her work.
Great.
How about you guys?
Well, for the longest time, I've been a fan of Naoto Fukasawa, Japanese designer. He is super minimalist, hyper minimalism. And lately I've liked Nendo from Japan too, which
love Nendo, yeah.
Again, they're also minimalistic.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to find new inspiration. If anyone has a few ideas that don't go too far from the Nendo / Naoto Fukasawa.
Just ease you out of the stark minimalism.
Just baby steps out of that. I would appreciate any recommendations.
Yeah.
I don't know if it counts as a designer, but like sculptors who are kind of designers, I guess. I mean, there's always Noguchi is a favorite backup, right? Taking giant slabs of stone and carving them into works of art. And then I guess the other one would be like Alexander Calder, who's like a big steel sculptor.
Yeah.
Mobile, like what's the
hanging mobiles.
Yes, and kinetic sculpture. That's the word I'm looking for. And so they move, they act on their own, they animate, and he also made little toys and stuff on top of that. So, and they're very robust works of art.
Yeah.
So they would definitely survive the bowl.
Indeed, yes. So we were also using this episode to introduce a new segment we're going to do with Cory, where he's going to be co-hosting one episode a month on the podcast, the next season of The Bomb. And I'm really interested to see, I'm like almost thinking as we're talking about these people, can we use Cory to try to get some of them on The Bomb? Like, now we should just start all of our design idols, try to line them up. But I think he has his own ideas, of who he wants to invite as well, of course.
Well, we can toss in a few suggestions in the bowl.
Yeah, just speak it into existence. We're
happens.
already doing it. Absolutely. So keep an eye out for that. Definitely coming down the pipeline. The next season, we're going to have Cory's co-hosted segments once a month, which will be super fun. I'm looking forward to that. And to wrap up our conversation today, just wanted to give a few updates. We have, if you are local to Pasadena, are going to be passing through LA soon, you might be able to come see DesignLab in person. We're going to have an event in collaboration with Innovate Pasadena's Connect Week in October. It'll be the week of October 10th, I believe specifically on October 13th, right, Bruce? And that'll be a combination of working with a local meetup group, Linux meetup group, and having sort of a tech crawl open house. So great opportunity to see the space in person. Again, that'll be October 13th. I believe you can find information about it on Innovate Pasadena's Eventbrite. They'll be putting those pages out soon if they haven't already, so register there. And then, of course, we've already been mentioning, because we're just in the countdown, the 30 days. Are we 30 days yet till SuperCon? Almost. No, next week.
Yeah, next week will be 30.
I think actually the day this episode comes out, it will be, because it'll be October 4th and November 4th is when SuperCon starts. So we're officially a month out. Check out more information about Hackaday Super Conference 2022. You can also find that on Eventbrite, more specifically Hackaday's Eventbrite page, or if you go to hackaday.com, you can see some articles about the speakers that you can see there, what kind of activities we're putting together, the Surface Mount Soldering Challenge, which is always a fun part of the conference. People get super competitive. There's multiple rounds and heats of competition for that. And of course, we'll be having the Hackaday Prize Award ceremony, where we'll be giving away a $50,000 grand prize to the winner of the Hackaday Prize this year. So keep an eye out for more information on that. And if you're interested in maybe volunteering, we're still accepting applications for volunteers. That's
Perfect.
a wrap. Mic drop.
Yeah, nothing else to add.
If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube, and DesignLab at Supplyframe DesignLab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast written, produced, and edited by Frank Driscoll and co-edited by Daniel Ferreira. Executive producers are Ryan Tillotson and Tyler Nielsen. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin with show art by Thomas Schneider. Special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, Matt Gunn, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Majenta Strongheart.